At 7:23 a.m. on December 14, 1944, Private First Class Eddie Brennan pressed his body into frozen mud beneath a fallen oak tree in Belgium's Hurtgen forest. German machine gun fire tore through branches 6 feet above his head. His platoon was pinned, bleeding out in the snow. In the next 4 hours, Brennan would violate every rule in the U.S. Army Sniper Manual and kill 18 Wehrmacht soldiers from a position so unorthodox that military doctrine explicitly forbade it. His court-martial would begin 63 days later. The Hurtgen Forest was where American infantry went to die. Between September and December 1944, the dense woodland along the German-Belgian border consumed entire divisions. Trees exploded into splinters from artillery. Visibility dropped to 30 yards. German pillboxes, invisible until you were dead, controlled every approach. The 28th Infantry Division lost 6,184 men in 3 weeks. The forest didn't care about tactics or training. It just killed. Eddie Brennan grew up in South Philadelphia, 3 blocks from the Navy Yard. His father worked the docks, loading cargo ships bound for Europe. Eddie spent his childhood in the narrow streets between row houses, learning to fight in alleys where backing down meant getting your face split open. He dropped out of school at 16 to work at Hog Island, riveting Liberty ship hulls for 12 hours a day. The work was brutal, but it taught him patience. Waiting for the rivet gun to heat, waiting for the foreman to look away, waiting for the right moment to act. Before the war, Eddie hunted deer in the Pine Barrens every November. Not for sport, for meat. His family needed it. He learned to move through brush without sound, to wait motionless for hours, to take shots other hunters wouldn't risk. His uncle taught him to read terrain, to think like prey, to understand that the deer wasn't afraid of you. It was afraid of what you represented. Movement, noise, the smell of cigarettes, and cheap whiskey. Eddie was drafted in March 1943. Fort Benning turned him into a rifleman. He qualified expert with the M1 Garand, but the Army didn't make him a sniper. They had enough snipers. They needed bodies for the line. So Eddie went to Europe as a replacement, assigned to Company B, 110th Infantry Regiment, 28th Division. He arrived in October 1944, just in time for the Hurtgen. The forest killed men in ways Eddie had never imagined. Artillery bursts in the treetops sent wood splinters down like javelins, shredding soldiers who thought they were safe in foxholes. German snipers fired from positions so well camouflaged that platoons walked within 10 feet without seeing them. The official doctrine for American snipers was clear: elevated positions, maximum visibility, clear fields of fire, find high ground, use trees for vantage points, maintain line of sight. Eddie watched men die following that doctrine. On November 8th, Private Vincent Hayes climbed a pine tree to establish an observation post. A German sniper put a round through his chest at 9:47 a.m. Hayes fell 20 feet and died in the snow, blood pooling around him while the platoon scrambled for cover. The German was never found. On November 19th, Corporal Samuel Briggs set up on a ridgeline overlooking a crossroads. He had perfect visibility for 400 yards. A German counter-sniper spotted his position within 90 minutes and called in mortar fire. Briggs took shrapnel to the throat. He drowned in his own blood before the medic reached him. On November 27th, Sergeant Thomas O'Rourke used a blown-out farmhouse as a sniper nest. Second floor, western window, textbook positioning. He killed 3 Germans before a Panzerfaust team obliterated the building. They found O'Rourke's rifle in the rubble. They never found enough of O'Rourke to bury. Eddie knew Hayes. They'd shared a foxhole during an artillery barrage in early November, pressed together in frozen mud, while the world exploded around them. Hayes was from Indiana, talked too much about his fiancée back home. Eddie didn't talk much, but he listened. When Hayes died, Eddie felt something shift inside him. not grief. He'd learned to bury that. Something colder. Calculation. The problem wasn't the men. It was the doctrine. American sniper training emphasized what the instructors called dominant positioning, high ground, clear sight lines, maximum range. The theory made sense on a rifle range. In the Hurtgen, it was suicide. German snipers had been fighting in forests since 1941. From the birch woods outside Leningrad to the pine forests of Poland. They'd learned what the Americans hadn't. In dense woodland, elevation makes you visible. Height makes you a target. Eddie understood this instinctively. He'd hunted deer for 8 years, and deer didn't look up. They looked across. Horizontal threats. Movement at eye level. A man in a tree was silhouetted against the sky, even through branches. A man on the ground was just another shadow. But the manual was explicit. Field Manual 2310, Sniper Training and Employment, published 1943. The sniper should seek elevated positions that provide observation over the maximum area of the battlefield. The Army didn't train snipers to fight from ground level. They trained them to climb. On December 2nd, Eddie watched another sniper die. Staff Sergeant William Peterson, 5 years older than Eddie, a hunter from Montana who should have known better. Peterson positioned himself 20 feet up an oak tree, trying to spot German movement near a contested road junction. Eddie was 50 yards away, prone behind a fallen log, watching Peterson work. The German round hit Peterson in the left eye. He didn't make a sound, just dropped his rifle and fell, hitting 3 branches on the way down. The Springfield clattered against wood, a sound like breaking glass. Peterson's body landed in a heap, one leg bent at an impossible angle. The German sniper never fired a second shot. Didn't need to. Eddie lay motionless for 3 hours, watching the tree line. He never saw the German, never heard movement. The shooter had fired from ground level, from somewhere in the undergrowth 200 yards away. Perfect concealment, zero visibility. Eddie realized the German wasn't hiding in the forest. The German was part of the forest. That night, Eddie couldn't sleep. He lay in his foxhole, staring at the black silhouette of tree branches against the sky, thinking about deer. Deer bedded down in low brush, under fallen trees, in natural depressions where the ground concealed them. They didn't climb to safety. They sank into it. Predators looked for movement at eye level and above. They didn't look down. What if a man could do the same thing? Eddie approached Captain Whitmore the next morning. Whitmore was 31, a former high school teacher from Ohio who'd been given a company to command after the previous CO took machine gun fire in the face. Whitmore was trying to keep 200 men alive in a forest designed to kill them. He didn't have time for theory. "Sir," Eddie said, "the snipers are dying because they're too high." Whitmore looked at him. "Elevated positions provide visibility, Brennan. That's doctrine. Doctrine's wrong for this terrain," Eddie said. "Germans are shooting from the forest floor. We're climbing trees and dying. You want to engage targets from ground level? You'll have zero visibility. I'll have concealment. That matters more." Whitmore shook his head. "The manual exists for a reason. Elevated positions. The manual was written for open terrain," Eddie interrupted. "This isn't open terrain. This is 30-yard visibility and tree-burst artillery. Height doesn't help. It kills." Whitmore stared at him. "You're a rifleman, Brennan, not a sniper." "Hayes was a rifleman, too," Eddie said quietly. "Briggs was a corporal. O'Rourke was a sergeant. They're all dead. I'm asking permission to try something different. And if you get killed doing it, then you're down one rifleman instead of another sniper." Whitmore was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't authorize this conversation. Clear?" Eddie nodded. "Clear. Don't get caught," Whitmore said, "and don't miss." That night, Eddie began preparing. He wasn't going to dig a hide or build a nest. He was going to disappear into the forest floor itself. He needed a fallen tree, something massive, with root structure still attached, creating a natural cavity underneath. The Hurtgen was full of them. Artillery and wind had toppled oaks and pines throughout the forest. Most lay half buried in mud and snow, rotting slowly into the earth. Eddie found what he needed on December 12th during a patrol, a massive oak, 60 feet long, blown over by artillery. The root ball had torn free from the earth, creating a depression 15 feet across. The trunk had fallen at an angle, leaving a gap underneath, maybe 14 inches of clearance. Snow had drifted against the log, providing additional concealment. From 30 feet away, it looked like every other fallen tree in the forest. From 3 feet away, it still looked like every other fallen tree. Eddie crawled underneath. The space was tight. He had to worm forward on his elbows, dragging his rifle beside him. The ground was frozen mud, hard enough to support his weight without leaving obvious impressions. The root ball created a natural backstop, blocking any silhouette. The trunk itself was 3 feet thick, solid oak, that would stop machine gun fire. He positioned himself facing north, toward German lines. Through the gap between trunk and ground, he had a horizontal sight line across the forest floor, maybe 6 inches of viewing angle, but it stretched for 200 yards. He could see the bases of trees, the undergrowth, the small rises and depressions in terrain. He couldn't see the sky. He couldn't see anything above 4 feet in height. Perfect. Eddie spent 3 hours under that log, not moving, just watching. He saw a deer pick its way through the snow 90 yards out. He saw 2 German soldiers walk past, close enough that he could hear them talking. Neither looked down. Why would they? Men fought at eye level. Threats came from elevation, from tree lines, from ridge tops. Nobody expected danger from the forest floor. Eddie crawled back to American lines after dark. His uniform was caked with frozen mud. His hands were numb. But he knew it would work. The question was whether the Army would let him live long enough to prove it. On December 13th, Eddie told Whitmore he'd found a position. He didn't explain the details. Whitmore didn't ask. The captain just nodded and said, "Radio check every 2 hours. If you miss a check, I'm sending a patrol." Eddie nodded. "Understood. And Brennan, if this works, I never gave you permission. If it doesn't work, I definitely never gave you permission." "Yes, sir." Eddie moved into position at 4:30 a.m. on December 14th. Dawn was 90 minutes away. He crawled under the fallen oak in complete darkness, navigating by memory, dragging his Springfield rifle and a canvas bag with 300 rounds. He wore every piece of cold weather gear the Army issued: wool sweater, field jacket, overcoat. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. Ground level in December. Moisture seeping through cloth. No movement to generate heat. He'd be hypothermic in 4 hours if he wasn't careful. He settled into position, packed snow against the gaps around his body to eliminate any silhouette, and waited. Dawn came slow. Gray light filtering through the tree canopy, turning black forest into endless shades of gray and brown. Eddie lay motionless, breathing slowly, watching his sector. The German line was somewhere between 200 and 400 yards north. Exact positions unknown. No patrols had penetrated deep enough to map them. At 6:15 a.m., Eddie saw movement. A German soldier, maybe 200, 20 yards out, moving between trees. Felled Grau uniform, M43 field cap, Car 98K rifle. The soldier was walking casually, cigarette smoke visible in the cold air. not expecting contact this deep in the woods. Eddie watched him through the scope. The German stopped, leaned against a tree, finished his cigarette. Then he moved on, disappearing into the undergrowth. Eddie didn't fire. Too easy to miss. Too likely to give away position. He waited. At 7:23 a.m., the German machine gun opened fire. Eddie heard it first. The distinctive ripping sound of an MG-42, firing somewhere east of his position. Then he heard American voices shouting, rifle fire returning in scattered bursts. His platoon was pinned down, probably by the same machine gun nest that had hit them 3 days ago. Eddie keyed his radio. Brennan to Whitmore. Contact east, 200 yards. I'm holding position. Whitmore's voice crackled back. Copy. Stay quiet unless you've got a shot. Eddie scanned his sector. The machine gun fire was loud, echoing through the forest, masking all other sound. Movement to his left. 3 German soldiers running forward, using the covering fire to advance. They were moving fast, low, professional. Eddie tracked the lead soldier through his scope. Range, 180 yards. Target moving left to right. Wind negligible. The Springfield was zeroed for 200 yards. Eddie adjusted slightly, leading the target's movement. He fired. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, trapped between his body and the frozen ground. The sound was enormous in the confined space under the log. The German soldier dropped instantly, falling forward into the snow. The other 2 soldiers froze, scanning the tree line, looking up and around. Not down. Eddie worked the bolt. The spent casing ejected, bounced off the underside of the log, landed in the mud beside his face. He chambered another round, found the second German in his scope. The man was crouched behind a tree, weapon ready, still searching for the shooter. Eddie fired again. Hit. The German pitched backward, clutching his chest. The third soldier ran. Eddie tracked him, fired, missed. The German disappeared into heavy undergrowth. Eddie chambered another round, scanning, waiting. The machine gun had stopped firing. Silence spread through the forest like spilled water. Eddie lay motionless, controlling his breathing, watching his sector. His ears rang from the muzzle blast. His shoulder ached. The smell of gunpowder hung in the confined space under the log, sharp and acrid. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Then Eddie saw them, 4 German soldiers, advancing in a line, 50 yards apart. They were moving cautiously now, weapons up, checking every tree, every shadow. They knew there was a sniper. They just didn't know where. Eddie let them come. Closer. The leftmost soldier was 140 yards out. The rightmost was nearly 200 yards. Eddie watched them through the scope, selecting targets, prioritizing. Closest first. He fired. The leftmost soldier dropped. Eddie worked the bolt. Fired again. The second soldier went down, screaming. The other 2 hit the dirt, returning fire blindly. Rounds smacked into trees, tore through underbrush, kicked up snow. None came close to Eddie's position. They were aiming too high. Eddie waited. 10 seconds. 20. One of the Germans moved, trying to low crawl toward cover. Eddie put a round through his spine. The 4th soldier broke and ran, stumbling through the snow, heading back toward German lines. Eddie let him go. The forest went quiet again. Eddie keyed his radio. Brennan to Whitmore. 5 confirmed. No contact on my position. Jesus Christ, Brennan, where the hell are you? Ground level, under a log. Silence on the radio. Then, say again? I'm prone under a fallen tree. They can't see me. Another pause. You're insane. I'm alive, Eddie said. They're not. The machine gun opened fire again, a long, sustained burst. Eddie heard American voices shouting, calling for suppression. He scanned his sector, waiting. 2 German soldiers appeared, running forward to support the machine gun position. Eddie dropped the first at 170 yards. The second made it 10 more yards before Eddie's round caught him in the hip, spinning him into the snow. 7 confirmed. Eddie worked the bolt, chambered another round. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. He felt the cold now, seeping through every layer, but he didn't feel afraid. He felt patient. Deer didn't panic. They waited. They chose their moment. Movement to his right. 3 more Germans, moving in a loose formation, heading toward the American position. Eddie tracked the leader. Range, 210 yards. Long shot through undergrowth. He adjusted for distance, led the target slightly, squeezed the trigger. Hit. The German dropped instantly. The other 2 scattered, diving behind trees. Eddie scanned, waiting for one to break cover. 30 seconds. A minute. Finally, one of them shifted position, trying to get a better angle. Eddie saw the movement through a gap in the brush, fired, hit the soldier in the shoulder. The man went down screaming. The last German didn't move. Smart. He stayed behind his tree, weapon ready, waiting. Eddie watched him through the scope, patient. 5 minutes passed. 10. The German shifted slightly, trying to get more comfortable. Eddie fired. The round punched through the edge of the tree and caught the German in the neck. He dropped without a sound. 10 confirmed. Eddie's radio crackled. "Brennan, we're pulling back. Can you cover?" "Affirm," Eddie said. "Moving in 3 minutes." He had maybe 200 rounds left. Enough. The American platoon began withdrawing, fire teams leapfrogging back through the forest. German fire intensified, rifle shots, machine gun bursts, the crump of mortar rounds impacting behind American lines. Eddie watched the German position, waiting for targets. A German machine gun team repositioned, trying to get a better angle on the withdrawing Americans. Eddie saw them through the undergrowth. 3 men carrying the MG-42 and ammunition boxes. They were moving fast, professional, staying low. Eddie led the first carrier, fired, hit. The man dropped the machine gun and fell. The other 2 dove for cover. Eddie worked the bolt, fired again, missed. The third round caught one of them in the leg. The remaining German grabbed the machine gun and ran, dragging it toward cover. Eddie fired, hit him in the back. The German dropped the weapon and fell forward into the snow. 13 confirmed. The German fire shifted. They were trying to locate Eddie now, pouring rounds into the tree line, walking fire across suspected positions. Eddie pressed himself flat, listening to bullets snap overhead, impact trees, tear through branches. None came low enough. They were still aiming too high. Eddie waited until the firing slackened, then scanned his sector again. More movement. 5 German soldiers, advancing in a staggered line, trying to flank the American position. They were good, using cover effectively, moving in short rushes. Eddie fired on the closest, hit. The soldier pitched forward. Eddie worked the bolt, fired. Another hit. The remaining 3 went prone, returning fire. Eddie ignored them, tracked one who was trying to low crawl forward, fired, hit him in the shoulder. 16 confirmed. Eddie's hands were numb now. The cold was winning, seeping through gloves, through wool, through skin. He flexed his fingers, trying to maintain feeling. Reload. 20 rounds left in the current clip, 170 in the bag. The Springfield was ice cold, frost forming on the metal. The two remaining Germans from the flanking group were repositioning, moving back toward their own lines. Eddie tracked them through the scope. 240 yards, long shot, moving targets. He fired anyway, missed, fired again. The second round caught one of them high in the back. The soldier stumbled, fell, didn't get up. 17 confirmed. The forest was chaos now. American fire pulling back, German fire pursuing, mortar rounds impacting in waves. Eddie lay motionless under his log, watching, waiting. His radio crackled constantly. Platoon leaders calling positions, casualties, ammunition status. Then he saw the last target, a German officer moving forward with two runners, trying to coordinate the advance. The officer was shouting orders, pointing, directing fire. He was 200 yards out, partially obscured by undergrowth, but Eddie could see enough. He centered the crosshairs on the officer's chest, adjusted slightly for range, breathed out slowly, fired. The officer dropped instantly, falling backward into the snow. The two runners scattered, diving for cover. 18 confirmed. Eddie lay still, watching, waiting for return fire. None came. The German advance had stalled. Their officer was down. Machine, gun teams were suppressed. The flanking element was scattered. Eddie keyed his radio. Brennan to Whitmore. Platoon clear to withdraw. I count 18 enemy down. Silence on the radio. Then Whitmore's voice, quiet. 18? Confirmed. I'm pulling back now. Eddie began the slow process of extraction. He couldn't just stand up and run. That would silhouette him against the forest, make him visible. He had to crawl backward, slow and careful, dragging his rifle and gear, staying below the log line. It took 20 minutes to move 30 yards. His body screamed with cold, muscles locked, fingers barely functional. But he was alive. He reached the American line at 11:47 a.m. Soldiers stared at him as he emerged from the undergrowth, caked head to toe in frozen mud, face pale with cold. Whitmore was there, watching Eddie stagger to his feet. 18? Whitmore said again. Eddie nodded. From ground level, under a fallen oak. You were under a log for 4 hours? Yes, sir. Whitmore just stared at him. Then he said, Get to the aid station. You're hypothermic. Eddie was. His core temperature had dropped to 94 degrees. The medic stripped off his frozen uniform, wrapped him in blankets, forced hot coffee into him. Eddie sat there shaking, not from fear, from cold, while soldiers crowded around asking questions. How'd you do it? Where were you positioned? How many did you really get? Eddie didn't answer. He just drank the coffee and waited for the shaking to stop. Word spread fast. By evening, every rifleman in the company knew Eddie Brennan had killed 18 Germans from a hide so well concealed that nobody had spotted him. By the next morning, soldiers from other companies were asking questions. By December 16th, 3 other riflemen had tried the same tactic. 2 of them got kills. 1 got nothing but hypothermia. But it worked. On December 18th, Private Raymond Fletcher used a hollow log to ambush a German patrol, killing 4 before the survivors retreated. On December 21st, Corporal James Dalton positioned himself under a root ball and took out a machine gun team that had pinned his platoon for 6 hours. The tactics spread quietly, man to man, whispered conversations in foxholes and aid stations. No officers ordered it. No training manual described it. It just happened, the way innovations always happened in war, from necessity, from frustration, from men who refused to die following doctrine that didn't work. The Germans noticed. On December 23rd, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter of the 275th Infantry Division wrote in his after-action report, "American sniper tactics have changed. Fire is now originating from ground-level positions, making counter-sniper operations extremely difficult. Traditional elevated search patterns are ineffective. Recommend increased use of indirect fire and systematic clearing of fallen timber." German snipers began checking ground-level positions, but it was already too late. The Americans had adapted faster. By January 1945, forest floor sniper hides were being used throughout the Hurtgen, and the technique was spreading to other units, other forests, other fronts. The German 302nd Volksgrenadier Division reported sniper casualties increased 47% in January compared to December. The Americans were invisible. German doctrine couldn't counter what they couldn't see. But Eddie Brennan never got credit. On February 15, 1945, military police arrested him at his battalion headquarters. The charge: unauthorized modification of sniper doctrine, violation of Field Manual 23-10, conduct unbecoming. Eddie didn't resist. He'd known this was coming since December 14th. The court-martial convened on February 19th at division headquarters in Luxembourg. Eddie stood before 3 officers, a colonel, a major, and a captain. None of them had been in the Hurtgen. None of them had watched men die following doctrine. The colonel read the charges. "Private First Class Brennan, you are accused of willfully disregarding established sniper procedure, endangering yourself and your unit through reckless tactical decisions, and undermining military discipline by encouraging other soldiers to violate training standards. How do you plead?" "Guilty," Eddie said. The colonel blinked. "You admit to these charges?" "Yes, sir. I violated the manual. I used ground-level positions. I told other men how to do it." The major leaned forward. "Do you understand that sniper doctrine exists to maximize effectiveness while minimizing risk?" "I understand the doctrine got men killed," Eddie said. "Hayes, Briggs, O'Rourke, Peterson. All dead because they followed the manual. The manual has been developed over years of combat experience." "Not forest combat," Eddie interrupted. "Not the Hurtgen. That manual was written for open terrain. The forest's different." The captain spoke up. "Even if your tactic was effective, which is disputed, you had no authority to make that decision. You're a private. You follow orders." "I followed Captain Whitmore's orders," Eddie said. "He told me not to get caught and not to miss. I didn't miss." The colonel's jaw tightened. "Captain Whitmore denies giving you any such order." Eddie nodded. "Yes, sir. He has to." Silence in the room. The 3 officers exchanged glances. The major said, "Your kill count from December 14th is listed as 18 confirmed. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir." "From a single position?" "Yes, sir." "Using a technique explicitly forbidden by doctrine?" "Yes, sir." Another silence. Then the colonel said, "Private Brennan, you will be remanded to custody pending sentencing. This court stands adjourned." Eddie was held in the division stockade for 3 days. On February 22nd, Captain Whitmore visited him. The captain stood outside the cell, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. "They're going to bust you to private," Whitmore said. "Maybe give you 30 days. Eddie nodded. "Could be worse. Could be better," Whitmore said. "If you'd kept your mouth shut." "Couldn't do that, sir." Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Fletcher got 6 kills yesterday. Dalton got 3 more. Your technique works, Brennan. Everyone knows it works. But it's not in the manual," Eddie said. "Not yet," Whitmore said. "Maybe after the war." Eddie shrugged. "Don't matter to me." Whitmore studied him. "You really don't care, do you?" "I care about Hayes," Eddie said. "And Briggs and O'Rourke." And Peterson, I care that they died following rules that didn't work. If I can stop that happening to someone else, I don't care what the Army does to me. Whitmore nodded slowly. Then he said, for what it's worth, you did the right thing. Tell that to the colonel, Eddie said. Whitmore smiled slightly. I did? Didn't help. On February 24th, Eddie Brennan was sentenced to reduction in rank to private, 30 days confinement, and forfeiture of 1 month's pay. The colonel read the sentence without emotion. This court recognizes that your actions resulted in enemy casualties and arguably protected American lives. However, military discipline cannot be maintained if soldiers unilaterally disregard established doctrine. This sentence serves as a warning to others who might consider similar violations. Eddie served his 30 days. He spent March 1945 in the stockade, eating bad food and sleeping on a thin mattress, while the war moved east without him. He didn't care. Hayes was still dead. Briggs was still dead. O'Rourke and Peterson were still dead. But Fletcher was alive. Dalton was alive. And somewhere in the forests of Germany, American riflemen were fighting from ground-level hides, invisible and effective. That was enough. Eddie was released on March 26th and reassigned to a replacement depot. He never saw combat again. The war in Europe ended May 8th. Eddie processed through demobilization in July and shipped home in August. He returned to South Philadelphia on August 23, 1945, wearing his uniform one last time, carrying a duffel bag and nothing else. His father met him at the train station. They shook hands. His father said, "You all right?" "Yeah," Eddie said. "I'm all right." They walked home through the streets Eddie had grown up in, past the row houses and corner stores and vacant lots where he'd learned to fight. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Eddie went back to work at the Navy Yard. The war was over, but ships still needed building. He riveted hulls for another 3 years, saved his money, and opened a garage in 1948. Brennan's Auto Repair, 3 blocks from where he'd grown up. He worked on cars, changed oil, fixed transmissions, and never talked about the war. People asked sometimes. Neighbors who'd heard stories. Customers who saw the discharge papers framed on his office wall. Eddie would shrug and say, "I was in the infantry, did my job, came home." He never mentioned the Hurtgen, never mentioned the 18 kills, never mentioned the court-martial. In 1952, Eddie married a woman named Dorothy who worked at the Five and Dime on Market Street. They had 2 kids, bought a house in the suburbs, lived quietly. Eddie coached Little League, fixed neighborhood kids' bicycles for free, and attended church every Sunday. He was a good man, people said. Quiet, but good. In 1957, the Army published an updated edition of Field Manual 2310. Chapter 6, Section 4 included a new subsection, Employment of Ground-Level Concealment in Forest Terrain. The manual described the use of fallen timber, root balls, and natural depressions as sniper hides in dense woodland. It cited effectiveness studies from the Hurtgen forest and recommended the technique for situations where traditional elevated positions were untenable. The manual did not mention Eddie Brennan. On November 11, 1973, Eddie attended a Veterans Day ceremony in Philadelphia. He stood in the crowd wearing a suit, hands in his pockets, while politicians gave speeches about sacrifice and service. After the ceremony, an older man approached him. The man was wearing an infantry veteran's cap. "You Eddie Brennan?" the man asked. "Yeah," Eddie said. "I'm James Dalton. I was in the 110th, Company C. We used your technique in the Hurtgen." Eddie nodded. "I remember the name." "I wanted to say thank you," Dalton said. You saved my life. Probably saved a lot of lives. Eddie looked uncomfortable. I just did what needed doing. You got court-martialed for it, Dalton said. That's more than doing what needed doing. That's courage. Eddie shook his head. Courage was Hayes climbing that tree knowing it might kill him. I just figured out a better way. Dalton smiled. That's what courage looks like in war. Not the dramatic stuff. The quiet decisions. They shook hands. Eddie never saw him again. Eddie Brennan died on March 8, 1989, at age 67. Heart attack, sudden, while he was working under a customer's Chevy. His obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned his garage, his family, his service in World War II. It said he'd been awarded the Bronze Star. It didn't say why. It didn't mention the Hurtgen Forest. It didn't mention 18 dead Germans, or a court-martial, or the technique that changed sniper doctrine. His funeral was well attended. Neighbors, customers, family. A color guard from the local VFW post fired a salute. They folded the flag and gave it to Dorothy. Eddie was buried in a veterans' cemetery outside Philadelphia, one white marker among thousands. In 1994, a military historian named Dr. Margaret Holloway was researching sniper tactics in the European theater. She found references in German after-action reports to American ground-level sniper positions in the Hurtgen Forest. She cross-referenced American records, found Captain Whitmore's unit reports from December 1944, discovered the 18 confirmed kills on December 14th. She traced the incident back to Eddie Brennan and found the court-martial transcript. Dr. Holloway published her findings in the Journal of Military History in 1996. The article was titled Tactical Innovation at the Individual Level, the Forest Floor Sniper Hide and the Hurtgen Forest Campaign. It described Eddie's technique in detail, analyzed its effectiveness, and traced its adoption throughout the American infantry. The article concluded that Eddie Brennan's unauthorized tactical innovation had saved an estimated 40 to 70 American lives during the winter of 1944-45. Nobody read it except other historians. In 2003, the Army Special Operations Sniper Course added forest floor concealment techniques to their curriculum. Instructors taught students to use fallen timber, root balls, and ground depressions as hide sites in woodland environments. The technique was considered standard doctrine by 2005. Training manuals credited field innovations during World War II without naming individuals. Eddie Brennan's name appeared in none of these documents. Today, if you visit Eddie's grave in the Veterans Cemetery outside Philadelphia, you'll see a standard white marble headstone. It lists his name, his rank, private, not private first class, his dates of service, and his death date. It doesn't mention his Bronze Star. It doesn't mention the Hurtgen Forest. It doesn't mention anything except the bare facts of his existence. But in forests around the world, snipers still use the technique Eddie invented under a fallen oak tree on December 14, 1944. They position themselves at ground level, invisible in the undergrowth, waiting with patience. Eddie learned hunting deer in the Pine Barrens. They don't know his name. They don't know his story. They just know the technique works. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through engineering studies or committee decisions or revised doctrine. Through enlisted men like Eddie Brennan, who watch their friends die and refuse to accept it, who violate the manual because the manual is wrong, who risk court-martial because some things matter more than regulations, Hayes mattered. Briggs mattered. O'Rourke and Peterson mattered. And Eddie Brennan, working alone in the frozen mud, figured out how to keep them from dying. The Army gave him 30 days in the stockade for it. History didn't give him anything at all. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.